You are listening to the Information Security and OSINT podcast, episode 5, originally released on May 1st, 2020. My name's Josh Amishav. This week we'll talk about how to map out the attack surface for your target. This is important both from an OSINT or red team and bug bounty standpoint to figure out where to focus your attacks, as well as for defensive folks who need an updated list of assets they need to defend. But first, let's talk about the latest InfoSec news. Direct support for this podcast comes from Breachsense, the data breach monitoring platform. You know the easiest way attackers break into your network? By using valid usernames and passwords. Attackers collect millions of leaked credentials from almost daily data breaches, but without having any visibility into which of your employees' or users' credentials have been leaked, it's tough to protect against this. Integrate Breachsense's powerful yet easy-to-use API into your existing security solutions to prevent account takeover and stop online fraud. A number of countries have started rolling out COVID-19 tracing apps. Several cyber intelligence companies are selling tools to governments that allow them to trace infections without users needing to opt in by installing an app, which obviously means they can't opt out either. On the other end of the spectrum, Google and Apple jointly created a tracing system that's a lot less intrusive, which uses Bluetooth. The advantage here is that it works indoors, which is a lot more accurate than using satellites or cell phone tower geolocation. The idea is that your device exchanges keys with any other Android or iOS device you encounter. Then, in the background, the devices automatically download a database to check for matching codes. If you self-report that you're infected, all devices that you've been around receive an alert that someone they've been around has tested positive. One issue the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, has pointed out, though, is that with this approach is vulnerable to replay attacks, meaning an attacker can collect RPIDs, the rolling proximity identifier, perhaps on a busy street corner, and then replay them. So anyone who passes one of these malicious beacons would log that they were close to someone that they weren't, leading to false positives. Britain's NHS has implemented a similar system, but theirs uses a centralized server, which allows them to gain more insight into the spread of the virus, but obviously has more privacy concerns than the peer-to-peer approach Google and Apple have taken. Presumably, all Android and iOS devices will receive a software update that can support this technology, so the infrastructure will be in place for mass support. This way, countries will hopefully be incentivized to use the Google and Apple codebase, which is much less intrusive and probably more secure than each country rolling their own infrastructure and codebase and waiting for a breach to happen. In other news, SecOps announced 2 0 days affecting Apple's default email app, one of them being a no-click exploit. This exploit uses an oversized email to infect the remote device and allows remote code execution without requiring any user interaction. SecOps claimed that both vulnerabilities they discovered were being actively used in the wild, but evidence for that looks pretty weak. It's not clear if the attackers simply deleted the emails after they exploited, or as Apple claims that there just isn't any evidence to support their claim. In any case, Apple rolled out a patch on the latest iOS beta release and will be patching the upcoming iOS public update. The World Health Organization has become a popular target for spear phishing attacks recently. The organization's chief information security officer said that some of the attacks are being perpetuated by nation-state hackers. Apparently, there's been a sustained attempt to plant malware on machines belonging to several key officials involved with the COVID-19 work. As mentioned last week, a number of WHO employee passwords are making the rounds on various hacker forums. I've seen these, and they're just rehashed from previous breaches. Having said that, several 4chan users said that they used the passwords to gain access to a WHO website called Extranet. According to the WHO CIO, only 400 of the 2,000 passwords leaks were still in use by the organization's employees. The Israeli government issued an alert this week for organizations in the water sector to update their passwords for any internet-facing control systems. Wastewater treatment plants as well as pumping and sewage facilities in Israel came under attack over last weekend. It's not clear what the attack was, but it sounds like it's some sort of credential stuffing brute force attack. The Israeli Water Authority said that the attacks did not cause any operational damage, and SCADA system attacks are not unheard of, so I'd like to think that any internet-connected device, like the kind we can find on Shodan, would at the very least have multi-factor authentication required. If the guys over at Macquarie need help monitoring breached credentials, then be in touch. CyberArk was able to access Microsoft Teams conversations by injecting a GIF image. The underlying root cause were 2 Microsoft subdomains that were vulnerable to subdomain takeovers, meaning there were 2 test or dev, meaning non-production Microsoft domains, that pointed to a third-party service that wasn't in use, like Azure or GitHub perhaps. CyberArk took over the domains, planted an image, and then demonstrated that you can send a link to the image to the victim with an HTML source attribute pointing to the compromised subdomain via team chat. When the victim opened the message, the browser sent the session token to the compromised subdomain, allowing them to scrape all the victim's data. Microsoft updated the DNS records for the two subdomains to fix the issue. Now here's a story that's a bit rare. ZDNet reported that Sophos published an emergency security patch to fix a SQL injection vulnerability in their XG Enterprise firewall product. SQL injection is one of those issues that you thought were kind of solved at this point. The issue was pre-authentication, so presumably it was on the administrative login page. The flaw was actively exploited in the wild by malware that stole data like usernames, passwords, user emails, and the firewall's license and serial number. The hotfix they pushed out patches the issue as well as notifies users if their firewall was exploited, in which case Sophos recommends resetting all local user accounts and passwords. They also recommend disabling the firewall's admin interface for being connected to the internet. The Daily Swig reports that there's an uptick in malvertising, which makes sense. Folks are working from home, which means their computers aren't necessarily up to date with patches, like they might be in an office setting. By playing on COVID-19 fears and using well-known logos, attackers are increasingly using ads to trick users into clicking on their malicious ads. According to AdSecure, most of the attacks attempt to distribute malware, adware, and promote phishing websites to harvest credentials. In a related story, ZDNet reports that a hacker group has been taking over ad servers based on the open source Revive ad server. Normally, most malvertising groups just buy ads on legitimate sites and then later modify the ad to load malicious code. This group went straight for the gold and compromised the ad servers directly, and then, due to real-time bidding integrations with other services, managed to get their malicious ads on thousands of sites. Ars Technica has a story about Nintendo, who reported 160,000 users were compromised in a recent attack. While there was some initial confusion on how the attacker got in, it turns out that Nintendo has a legacy login system called Nintendo Network ID, or NNID for short. This has accounts linked to the normal Nintendo profile. Many users didn't even know they had an older NNID account. Due to the resistive screen keyboards on the older devices, it made it really hard to choose a strong password. Now, the problem is the NNID system never died, so once the attackers compromised an NNID account, they could steal any PayPal or Switch eShop funds tied to the account. Now, it's not clear what actually happened because Nintendo claims that this wasn't a credential stuffing attack, but in any case, the company is forcing hacked users to reset their passwords and encourage all users to enable two-factor authentication on their accounts, which is always a good thing. And here's a story with a happy ending. Bleeping Computer reports that the team behind the Shade ransomware have not only shut down their operations and apologized to victims, but they've also published over 750,000 decryption keys on GitHub. The ransomware primarily targeted people in Russia and the Ukraine. Now, it's not clear what triggered this change of heart, but Kaspersky's Labs has confirmed that the keys are valid and that they were able to use them to decrypt a test machine. Following up from last week's story on grocery delivery slot hunting, Motherboard has a follow-up story about CartDash, which automatically hunts for free delivery slots on Instacart. The tool lets users select items that they want from Instacart as normal. Then users provide it with their email address, password, mobile number, tip amount, and whether they prefer the first available delivery slot or flexible. CartDash then logged in for you and would automatically refresh the checkout page over and over again until a new delivery slot opened up and would grab it and place your order. Motherboard interviewed the creator of this tool, who actually received a cease and desist email from Instacart during the interview and has since shut down the service. Instacart has said that these types of tools go against their terms of service. Now, I just hope that they have a better anti-automation technique protection than sending emails to bot creators to stop this. The American NSA and Australian ASD issued a joint advisory on the increasing use of web shells and compromised servers. Now, I'd love to know what's behind this because we've been using web shells and nation states and hackers have been using them to run system commands on compromised servers for a really long time. The advisory specifically recommended patching, and then they have a list of the most common vulnerabilities that are exploited to upload a web shell. The NSA also put up instructions as well as tools on their GitHub repository that explains how to find the uploaded shells, which should be helpful for some admins. I'll leave a link to this in the show notes. Now let's talk a bit about asset discovery. This is important both from a OSINT perspective when researching a company, as well as for red teams and bug bounty hunters. Obviously, you can't protect what you don't know exists, and the larger your attack surface, the greater your odds are of finding a bounty. So let's talk about some methods to figure out what internet assets a company domains. For the sake of this experiment, let's use Disney as an example. The first step for a large company is to figure out what ASNs they own. I like to use Hurricane Electric's search engine for this because it doesn't have a lot of the restrictions in terms of the number of lookups you can send that other services have. It also lets you search on a vanilla term like just Disney, without having the exact name, which can differ. So searching in this case for Disney, we'll find things like Disney Online, Disney Interactive, and Disney streaming services. Go over to bgp.he.net and put in the search term Disney, and you'll get back a very large list of IP ranges they own. Now this is a good starting point. We can later on use something like mass-scan for an initial port scan. Just in terms of port scanning, I would avoid Nmap for large IP ranges because it's really slow. Later on, we will use Nmap for version detection and NSC scripting, but initially I like to use mass-scan to get a better idea of which ports are open. Now another tip is to take a look at CrunchBase to see what acquisitions the target has made. Depending on how long ago it happened, the networks may still not be fully integrated, so bounty hunters can use this to find more assets that are in scope. In this case, on CrunchBase, we can search for Disney, then click on the Walt Disney Company, and then click on acquisitions to see what other companies they bought and may be in scope. Then we repeat the previous process and add the new IP ranges to our scope. Next, I like to do reverse whois lookup on the target's primary domains to see what other domains they've registered. There are two tools that do this well, domainbigdata.com and viewdns.info. Let's search the reverse whois lookup function on viewdns for disney.com. It finds 20,006 domains that match that query. Note that a portion of these may be Disney employees who registered domains using their work email address. By default, ViewDNS lets you view the first 500 domains for free. If you need access to more, you'll need a paid account. One useful technique to drill down to find interesting domains here is to capture the output table. Now, you can use a number of Chrome extensions that convert HTML tables into CSV, and then import that into Paterna's case file to find the relationships. Normally, you can see groups of domains that share the same registrar or registration date, and then you'll see obvious outliers that may be interesting and require more investigation. Once we have a list of domains, we want to start finding the subdomains. Now, there are two approaches we have here, subdomain scraping and subdomain brute forcing. An example of subdomain scraping would be the traditional Google dork of searching for something like Disney.com and minus www. So that brings up anything with Disney.com, but we don't want the obvious www.disney.com, so it finds everything else. You get the results, then you see something like lol.disney.com. So then you search for Disney.com minus space minus www and space minus lol, and then you'll get sap.disney.com, and you just rinse and repeat, and you can enumerate domains. Now, there are a number of data sources we can use like VirusTotal or Census that have a lot of subdomain data. One way I like to query Census is to return all the TLS certificate alternate names for a given domain. The search term for this is 443.https.tls.certificate.parse.extensions.subject _alt_name.dns_names : space, and then your search term as in Disney.com. And you'll get back a lot of new subdomains like xnet.disney.com and miportal.disney.com. Now don't worry about the search terms, it's all in the documentation, and you can just start typing 443 and you get a drop-down box of all the different options. But this is a really good tool that you can use to find other subdomains belonging to your target. Now you can automate a lot of this process, and two of the best tools that I like for this is AMAS and SubFinder. AMAS starts with the basic DNS enumeration, but also uses more advanced techniques like subdomain alterations and permutations. It queries a number of search engines and tools, as well as databases like Census and cert.sh and web archives like ArchiveIt and the Wayback Machine. Now, SubFinder is really fast. You'll need to set up API keys for the data sources of queries like Shodan and URL Scan and Census, but it's great for automating a bunch of the data sources to find new subdomains. The other method we can use to enumerate subdomains is brute force. An example of some subdomain brute force tools are GoBuster and MassDNS. MassDNS is written in C, so it's super fast. One of the cool features of MassDNS is that it's not relying on your DNS infrastructure. It comes with a configurable list of DNS servers that it uses to divide up the load, which allows it to brute force potential DNS subdomains very quickly. Having said that, you'll need a good word list. And there are a couple options here. Jason Haddix maintains one called alt.txt, which I'll leave a link in the show notes. Another interesting tool is AltDNS. This tool takes in a word list, as well as a list of subdomains that you know of. It then generates a massive list of altered or mutated potential subdomains that could be present. And then you feed this output into a tool like MassDNS. A tool to generate word lists is CommonSpeak. CommonSpeak is a word list generator that uses public datasets from Google's BigQuery to query out what new terms are trending on the internet. So if Harry Potter characters are all the rage right now, this would give you visibility into that and generate a word list on the current trends. Another tip to find related domains, which we talked about previously, is using BuiltWith to find other domains that share the same tracking codes, like Google Analytics codes as your target. You used to be able to do this via the built-in Chrome extension, but without a paid account, you may need to do this manually via the Relationship Profile tab. When we search Disney.com using this technique, we get another 635 domains that share the same tracking tokens. Now, hopefully at this point, you've got a pretty good list of assets and have mapped out your target's attack surface. So let's summarize. You start with the ASN lookup for your primary target. You can use tools like CrunchBase to see what other companies they own, which may be in scope as well. Next, do a reverse lookup on the domains that you know about, and finally enumerate subdomains via automated scraping tools like AMAS, as well as brute force DNS names using something like MassDNS. That's it for today. If you have any feedback or questions, please contact me at podcast@breachsense.io. And if you got value from this episode, then please leave a short 2-sentence review on iTunes or Stitcher and share with a friend. See you all next week.